Okay, so we have three guest speakers today. I'm here, I exist solely for one reason, which is to make sure that they adhere to the 25-minute limit, right? Yes. So now I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, how could a weak old man like myself possibly enforce such a thing? There are three of you, there's one of me. Yeah, well, guess again. Come, boys, girls. These are our best and strongest students. Sarah Constantinople. Yeah, what? No? That's not your name?
No.
What's your name?
Alana.
Alana Verhoeven?
No.
Oh. Okay. All right. And, of course, Victor Shakopopoulos. What?
It's Tyler.
Tyler? Tyler Verhoeven? No. Ah. Jeff, I think we know who's Dickie. Well, okay, so going forward, the first person coming up is going to be Colm Kelleher, and he is going to talk on the UAP and parapsychology, lessons learned from managing a Pentagon classified study. So,
well, you guys are a hard act to follow, I must say. Thank you so much, Jeff, for inviting me. I think this last 24 hours has been tremendously educational. I'm a biochemist by trade, and pretty well nothing that I've heard in the last 24 hours I've heard before. So it has been tremendous. I look forward to another 48 hours of bliss. So I'm going to talk about a program called AOTI, and it was run between 2008 and 2010. I was the program manager of that program. So AOTI is going to be an acronym that's used pretty frequently. The second acronym I'm going to use is NIDS, NIDS, which stands for the National Institute for Discovery Science, which was a program that was funded, privately funded, that was focused on the UFO topic between 1996 and 2004. So what was AOTI? It was a $22 million program that was focused on UFOs. It was run out of the Defense Intelligence Agency, and it was overseen by another intelligence agency, the Undersecretary for Defense and Intelligence, USDI, or it's now known as OUSDI and S, because DoD loves acronyms and they like expanded acronyms if possible. So we think, after looking at the history of the UFO phenomenon and the United States government relationship with the UFO phenomenon, that the AOTI program was arguably the biggest program that the United States government has admitted to with respect to UFOs. And AOTI stands for the Advanced Aerospace Weapons Systems Application Program. So obviously I'm not going to be saying that too often. So AOTI is really where we're at. So in November of 2008, I was recruited into the AOTI program. I was employee number 1. And my main task was to get a team of researchers, scientists, and engineers together, lickety-split. And we're talking months rather than years. So over the next 9 months, I think I calculated at one time that I had conducted about 300 interviews in a 7-month period, both by telephone and by face-to-face. So it was a pretty intense program. Pretty intense recruitment process, but we ended up with about 50 full-time employees that were only focused on investigating UFOs. That was the departure for this Defense Intelligence Agency program. We had PhD level physicists and biologists. we had engineers, we had technicians, military intelligence people. We also put together a large database, so we hired a bunch of database analysts, and we also had retired police investigators, translators, and also security officers. So if you take all of that into one pile, we did a lot of hiring during that 9-month period. It was the design of the AOTI program, though, that was pretty well unique, and hopefully by the end of what I'm talking about today, I'm going to propose that the AOTI program is a really good template for future UFO programs. And once I get through talking about this, hopefully you'll agree, or maybe not. The focus for AOTI was twofold. Number one, it was exclusively focused on measuring UFO performance. In other words, sensors were used to capture UFO performance. But the second and more controversial part of the AOTI program was that it was investigating effects of UFOs on people. And that sort of began to once you started following that data stream of looking at effects of UFOs on people, you started getting into physiological effects, you started getting into pathological effects, psychological effects, and ultimately what ended up was that once we started interviewing people, we started getting evidence of paranormal effects as a result of interactions with UFOs. Now, as you can imagine, that was quite controversial to the management team in the Defense Intelligence Agency. But the working group that I was associated with were a set of engineers and a set of scientists at DIA who were incredibly interested in designing a program where both of these arms of research were baked into the program. And so we baked it in terms of training investigators, in terms of database structure. In fact, the entire database that we created was focused not only on UFO performance, but also on effects of UFOs. So AOTI was primarily a field research program. It was not, it was not a contract to generate a whole bunch of white papers. We were definitely focused and we were engineered to get out into the field and do a lot of research. So this slide here really sums up the ethos that surrounded both AOTI and also the National Institute for Discovery Science. We knocked on a lot of doors. One of our sort of departure points was a place called Skinwalker Ranch, which was in the northeastern Utah. And we knocked on dozens and dozens of doors in northeastern Utah. And the upshot of this was that we began to ask the question whether or not the paranormal activity and UFO activity that was on Skinwalker Ranch was unique to Skinwalker Ranch, or was it actually, was Skinwalker Ranch, just a sort of a drop in the ocean that happened to be really well studied. And after going in a 2-mile radius around the property, we knocked on every door within a 2-mile radius of the Skinwalker Ranch. And we found that there was a plethora of activity that happened in the area around Skinwalker Ranch. So we got answers to our questions pretty quickly. Skinwalker Ranch was not unique. There was nothing sort of nothing unique about it. Neighbors and neighbors of neighbors were experiencing the same kind of activity that was seen on Skinwalker Ranch. So this just gives you an idea of what the scope of AOTI was. So the first bullet point, there are 3 red bullet points and 3 black ones. You don't have to read them all, but the red ones focus on the paranormal type effects that we were investigating, whereas the black bullet points focus on the nuts and bolts kinds of UFOs. So bullet point number 1 was way back when, before the New York Times article in December of 2017 broke the whole story about this secret Pentagon UFO study, we were studying back in 2008 or 2009 a case that became known as the Tic Tac case, which involved the USS Nimitz off the coast of San Diego back in 2004. We interviewed a lot of pilots, we interviewed a lot of crew people, we wrote up a report for the Defense Intelligence Agency, submitted it by mid-2009, and all of this was absolutely under wraps, all of it was secret. And then, of course, the New York Times came out in December of 2017 with the story about the Tic Tac case. So we were kind of, we were first with the Tic Tac case, but we also looked at a bizarre series of sightings in rural California that had to do with everything from unusual creatures were reported by these people. We dispatched a team out to California, and we had electromagnetic effects, we had poltergeist effects. So the team initially went out to investigate UFOs, but it ended up actually gathering data on a whole bunch of different creatures, electromagnetic effects, poltergeist effects. We also looked at a UFO-driven case in rural Indiana. We dispatched a team out there to spend 3 or 4 days investigating. And, you know, a UFO event had occurred to this family, and then within a week or two, this family had been besieged by poltergeist activity. So, you know, the report that we wrote was a twofold report to the Defense Intelligence Agency, and it actually focused on the UFO event. It had also focused on the poltergeist series of activities. So we found over time, during the 27 months of the program, that the more reports that we submitted, and we submitted a total of 100 technical reports in 27 months to the DIA, we found there was more and more controversy happening as these reports were being submitted to the DIA. And the reason for that is that the scope of AAWSAP in terms of following the data conflicted with some of the priorities that were happening at DIA. So another really sort of big focus was bullet point number 5. And this is sort of in the classic UFO investigation tradition, the design of an autonomous UAP surveillance platform. And this was a standard way of deploying a set of instruments out in the wild, leaving and then getting the data over time. We had gone through with mechanical engineers, we had designed, we had software engineers involved, and we had a very, very preliminary prototype of this, this surveillance platform when the program ended at month number 27. And finally, we had constructed what we thought at the time was the largest UAP database in North America. It comprised 11 separate databases and about 200,000 cases. These databases were submitted to the Defense Intelligence Agency. I have no doubt at all that eventually they will be released. And I think all of the reports that the DIA have sitting on their shelves will eventually be released. I know that the first 30, 35 reports have already been released. So I think it's only a matter of time when the program is fully transparent and all of the reports will be sort of out in the public. That process is taking a lot of time, but the FOIA process, if anybody is familiar with the FOIA process, is not a fast process. So just to sort of underline this whole thing, Skinwalker Ranch, this 500-acre ranch in northeastern Utah, really epitomized for us this sort of co-location of both standard UFOs, what we call nuts and bolts type UFOs, and co-located and in the same vicinity as, parapsychological effects. So bullet point number 2 was one of these times on the left-hand side, bullet point number 2 was within a few weeks of arriving on the ranch, I had this sort of encounter with an object that was very, very fast moving. It came from the north over Skinwalker Ridge, which is a ridge that bounds the northern edge of the property. And I was with a physicist at the time, and it came right over our heads, silently, brightly lit, but you could see a structure underneath, and did a perfect hairpin turn right over my head with G-forces that would have made, strawberry jam of most people in the cockpit. And it turned around and then went back exactly where it came from. But it was a combination of the low altitude, the silence, and the speed, and the tight hairpin turn that really caught my attention. It was one of those holy shit moments when I realized, this was not sort of an average, we were out there to investigate, we were out there to document, but what happened that night sort of changed things for me because my mentality began to think, yeah, maybe this is possible. And so it was sort of a change in my, in my demeanor. And, other people on the ranch had the same kind of wow moments. There was a lot of activity on Skinwalker Ranch over time, and this was the kind of thing that routinely happened. But the point of this slide is really that on the left-hand side of the left-hand panel, we've got a lot of UFO activity was documented on the property, but co-locating and in the same time frame, there was also a bevy of discarnate voices, telepathic transmissions, poltergeist activity. We had multiple different types of orbs seen on the property, and these are these baseball-sized orbs that are blue, red, and white. And, different orb colors seem to have different behaviors, and some of those behaviors were not particularly healthy to humans, the blue orbs especially. And also we documented what we began to call the hitchhiker effect, which is, I'll talk about that in a couple of minutes. It's the idea that after florid activity on the ranch, people went home to the East Coast and they brought something with them. So this is just to say that Skinwalker Ranch is not unique. I think there's a lot of evidence for that now. We deployed teams when there was a lull in Skinwalker Ranch activity. We deployed teams to Dulce, New Mexico, to San Luis Valley, Colorado. We were working closely with a police captain from Great Falls, Montana, named Keith Wolverton, back in the National Institute for Discovery Science days. Bottom line from this left-hand panel is that we found the same kind of pattern of activity. We found UFO activity, we found paranormal activity, we found strange creatures, we found cattle mutilations, all co-located in the same place. In Dulce, New Mexico, we were very privileged to be able to talk to a lot of the elders in the Icarilla Apache tribe in Dulce, New Mexico, and we were very fortunate to be able to talk to these people because they had never talked to people outside their group before. So we were very fortunate to get that data, but it backed up completely what we had discovered on Skinwalker Ranch. In other words, it was UFO activity plus a large umbrella of a lot of other type of activity. I don't know if any in the audience know this guy, Stan Gordon in Pennsylvania. He's been researching UFOs in Pennsylvania for about 60 years. And this guy is the quintessential door knocker. He spends a lot of time talking to people in Pennsylvania, and he has brought home a lot of data that supports exactly what I've been saying, that there is a lot of UFO activity, there's a lot of orb activity, there's a lot of strange creatures that people report. And remember, it's not only, you don't get this information on the first visit. It takes 4 or 5 visits for people to feel safe and for people to start feeling comfortable. And once people start opening up, then that is the sort of the change when they no longer are just talking about UFO performance. They're also talking about a lot of activity that you would classify as high strangeness. So very briefly, the hitchhiker effect really was coined from Skinwalker Ranch. We had 5 DIA, TSSCI clearances, analysts who were deployed basically to check the place out. I mean, the whole thing was, is this for real, or is there's a bunch of people making this stuff up? So we had 5 analysts deployed at different times. All 5 of them had florid experiences while they were on the property. Once they got home, paranormal activity started erupting in their homes. Family people, kids, wives began to experience paranormal activity as well as poltergeist activity. Hitchhiker effect happened on a much sort of more subtle, low-level way to myself, to Robert Bigelow, to George Knapp as a journalist who has spent a lot of time on Skinwalker Ranch. He has experienced the same thing. A lot of people who have been on the property have experienced this, bringing stuff home, but not to the same sort of in-your-face effect that these 5 DIA analysts experienced. That was a sort of a departure. So this is a sort of a humorous slide because what part of the hitchhiker effect, left panel shows a sort of a drawing that was done on some of the family members of this guy who had brought stuff home with them. And this is what they, both kids and the wife saw at different times in their home in Virginia, which is what, 2,500 miles away from Skinwalker Ranch. This stuff started happening. These creatures are anatomically impossible, to use Jeff's term. But I mean, you cannot have a dog that's running fluidly at 20 miles an hour on 2 feet. And this was a sort of a feature of these creatures. The right-hand panel, it shows that this is not a unique thing to Skinwalker Ranch. It's actually a composite rendition of dozens and dozens of sightings that were gathered from this woman, Linda Godfrey. Last slide, I'm going to talk about the role of deception in this whole thing. I'm just going to talk about the 2 top, or the top horizontal panels and the bottom horizontal panels. The diagonal panel, I don't have time to talk about, but it's kind of interesting. But we had the good fortune to interview Colonel Barry Hennessy, who was the head of AFOSIPJ, Air Force Office of Special Investigations, which is the counterintelligence arm of the United States Air Force. And its role is to protect special access programs and advanced technology. Its role is also to engage in deception and covert programs to mask the special access programs that they have. And frequently, according to Colonel Barry Hennessy, it's very, very common to use the UFO phenomenon in a deceptive way to perpetrate rumors, to perpetrate innuendo regarding, crashes of, advanced prototypes are turned into UFO crashes and stories about UFO crashes. We also asked him about the so-called Northern Tier sightings, which is that in the 1970s, we had Loring Air Force Base in Maine, Wurtsmith Air Force Base in Wisconsin, Malmstrom Air Force Base in Montana, Minot Air Force Base in North Dakota. All of these Air Force bases were plagued by UFO activity during the 1970s and 1980s. Colonel Hennessy was pretty frank in telling us that, yes, some of these were ours. We were using these as penetration detectors to see what the rapid reaction to an emergency would be on these Air Force bases, which are extremely important. They're there for the sort of defense of the United States against incoming over the North Pole. But he said a good, 50% of these cases, they had no idea who was invading their airspace. So the top panel here is basically saying that Colonel Hennessy was saying that there was very, very frequent deceptive programs that were being deployed to fool people into thinking that UFOs were there, where in fact it was just a cover for special access programs. Bottom panel and left-hand side, NIDS, National Institute for Discovery Science, investigated about 150 separate cases of black triangles during the 1990s and the 2000s. And it was a remarkable sort of data set because they were almost identical cases from all around the United States. People were seeing these large, football field-sized objects, triangular in shape, brightly lit, extremely low flying, and we're talking treetop level. We're not talking 1,000 feet, treetop level, and completely silent. They were flying over people's homes and homesteads in the United States. They were floating down interstate highways. And, after the first 10, we began to say, if this is a United States Air Force special access program, these pilots are absolutely crazy. They're probably on DMT. But after the first 100 cases, we began to realize, something else is going on. So the hypothesis we came up with was that, in fact, the phenomenon was probably mimicking special access programs, because there is really no other explanation for these low-flying, they're incredible safety hazards for these low-flying aircraft to be literally treetop level over populated areas. It just would not happen. People would be fired immediately in that situation, and they would lose their security clearances. So bottom line is, there are two lenses of deception for investigating UFO activity. Those two lenses cause a blurring of the actual UFO phenomenon. So it is one reason why we think that it has been pretty slow going in terms of coming to good data on the UFO phenomenon. This phenomenon has been in our faces for 75 years, and we have not made a lot of progress in the investigation of this phenomenon. And one of the reasons, in our opinion, is that there are two layers of deception that you have to go through. This is not a normal scientific program. This is not hematology, it's not immunology, where you can kind of trust what you're studying. You can't trust what you're studying. And so I'm going to leave it at that. And I don't think there's questions.